The Buddha said, "Do not accept what I said out of mere faith or reverence, but analyze it the way a goldsmith analyzes gold, by cutting, rubbing, and burning it, to see if it is authentic or not." So what the Buddha did was encourage his followers to analyze what they've been taught, to actually test the teachings and to see if they're real or not. And this is one of the main reasons why I became a Buddhist initially. It's because no other religion that I was presented with gave me this choice to use my own reasoning and also to have the freedom to analyze and not rely on blind faith. So the Buddha taught that you shouldn't have blind faith. You should look into it for yourself.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcasts are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Lama Choga, thank you for coming on Broaderlands podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Boo Boo. Pleased to meet you.
Yeah, I reached out to you because I love your message. I love your channel on YouTube, and I'll be putting that on the links when I upload this video. And I really appreciate your work. So thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, please give me the link when you get it, and then I'll share it with my community.
Yeah, no problem. I guess my first question is, who was the Buddha in your understanding?
Yeah, so in general, when you ask any question in the Buddha Dharma, then you have to think about the vehicle or the view, the level of view that's being presented when you make that answer, because you'll get different answers depending on that vehicle. Now, maybe to make it a bit more simple, we generally have three levels of Buddha Dharma. That's the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. And they all present it slightly differently. So in the context of the Hinayana, and that would be the Theravada tradition, then the Buddha was a human being who in his lifetime had achieved final awakening. But it's taught slightly differently in the Mahayana, and it depends upon this sutra called the Lalita Vistara Sutra. And there in the Mahayana, then what they teach is that Buddha was already enlightened before coming to our world, the human world, and that Buddha was waiting in Tushita heaven until the time when our karma was sufficiently ripened that it was appropriate for a Buddha to appear. And so what it's taught is that Buddhas don't appear at any time. There are other enlightened beings. They're called self-realizers or Pratyeka Buddhas. But that there's only certain conditions under which a Buddha can come to our world. So in terms of what we know historically, then there seems to be a lot of evidence that there was a historical figure of this sort of Shakya clan. So this is the family of the Buddha. And that this significant individual is the historic Buddha and was an actual teacher. And there seems to be a lot of evidence to prove that. And so this sort of mundane representation fits very well with the way it's presented in the Theravada tradition. And that is that the Buddha was born as the son of a powerful king in Nepal, and then at some point sought enlightenment, and so became a renunciate. Famously, then the Buddha cut off his hair at the foot of a stupa and then left his palace life to become a renunciate and then achieved final awakening. And as I said before, then in the Mahayana, which is the greater way vehicle, then this Buddha was an enlightened being already. In fact, a 10th level Bodhisattva is also considered to be an enlightened being. And at the moment, there is a 10th level Bodhisattva called Maitreya Buddha. This is the next Buddha that will come in several 100,000 years from now. But that this Maitreya Buddha has already been enlightened and is sort of waiting his turn, or her turn could be, to sort of take the throne in Tushita heaven. Now, at this point, I'd just like to explain something so we can understand a little bit about the differences of these views and how they interpret the historical Buddha and the teachings of the Buddha. So in the Buddha Dharma, we have generally what are called three schools. And these are the Southern School, the Northern School, and the Eastern School. And the southern school are the yellow robe-wearing monks that you'll find in Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, most of Southeast Asia. The Eastern tradition is what we call Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Northern, Vietnam, Laos, that sort of thing, anywhere that borders on China. And they tend to wear gray robes, but they're more like a kind of karate suit or something. They don't look like this. We've got these yellow monks. They just sort of wear a shawl, right, and a dress. But the Chinese ones, they look a little bit like kung fu masters, and they're almost like pajamas or something, and they're gray or they're slightly mustardy colored, a little bit different. So you'll be able to identify them. And then there's the Tibetans, and they wear the robes that I wear, and that's like the Dalai Lama. So very many people have seen this kind of robe, right? And they're the northern school. And so broadly speaking, we can say that these southern tradition, these Thai forest monks, etc., they're following the Hinayana, or the Theravedic tradition. And then the ones who wear the kind of kung fu suits from China and Korea, they're Mahayana Buddhists, and that the Tibetans are Vajrayana Buddhists. But one thing we have to understand is that the Tibetans themselves are very heavily influenced by Mahayana Buddhism. It's not just Vajrayana. In fact, Vajrayana practitioners are quite rare, authentic ones. But they have this extra kind of layer of tradition, and that was what we call Vajrayana. And the Vajrayana involves deity worship and that sort of thing.
What inspired you to become a monk?
Well, really, I was inspired on the spiritual path. The impetus wasn't to become a monk. In fact, I don't think I've ever had this feeling that I should become a monk in my life. But what I had since a very young age was were questions about the fundamental paradoxes of existence. For example, what is the origin of the universe? And I think when I was younger, then these manifest in an interest in physics and that sort of thing, to try to find out why there's a universe, why we're here, and what is significant or special about this self-aware consciousness. But my answers not being able to be sort of satisfied, these answers not satisfying me from a young age, and then I started to look towards sort of the Eastern traditions, especially those that involved meditation. Now, in my own home country, Canada, then I have to say that I never knowingly even met a Buddhist. I come from somewhere called Edmonton, Alberta, in the Midwest of Canada, and it's very heavily kind of right-wing Christian at that time. And although there are probably a few Buddhists at that time when I was young, when I was growing up, I'd never really knowingly met one. And pretty well everybody I met was Christian. And I you could say I rejected Christian theology from a young age. A lot of things didn't make sense. And this perplexed me. And so part of my journey when I was quite young, then I left my home of Canada and I went to Britain, where I had no relatives or no connections. And it was based on that I was able to actually encounter the Buddha Dharma. And, I had an interest at some time in Hindu yoga, and I was a yoga teacher for quite a few years. And in the Hindu tradition, then they also teach meditation. And so I did some Hindu meditation. But I was not satisfied by the meditation instructions that I was getting within the yoga tradition itself. And I seemed to have more of a connection with the Buddhist presentation, or you could say the Buddhist techniques, because the difference primarily lies in methodology. And so I was attracted to that. And so even when I was teaching yoga, then my meditation was Buddhist meditation, but specifically meditation that was based on this kind of Vajrayana or Tibetan tradition. And so naturally then one has this kind of feeling, right? You're meditating and practicing and you want to take your practice a little bit further. And then within the Tibetan tradition, when you take your practice further, then the thing to do is to go into retreat. That's what we that's the kind of storyline we hear. We hear about the masters of the past, and like the Buddha, at some point they gave up everything and they went off into the wilderness and they dedicate themselves solely to meditation. And so at some point this opportunity arose for me, and I was able to give up my life and go into a long retreat in a traditional Vajrayana retreat environment in Scotland. And in fact, my monastery is based in Scotland. And so it was on the basis of going into retreat and in practicing intensely that I then took the commitment to take robes. But something interesting is that when we go into retreat as lay people in the West, in this tradition, then what we do is we take temporary robes. And so because of that, before we went into retreat, then I started dressing like a monk. And we do take vows. They're kind of temporary vows. And then at the end of coming out of the 4-year retreat, then I traveled to India and I took the full set of vows from Tai Situ Rinpoche in Bling in northern India.
Yeah, thank you. One main question I would love to ask you is from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, what is reincarnation and karma? What's the whole purpose?
Mm. Yeah, so there's the kind of foundations or fundamental aspects of Buddhism. And one of these is a belief in karma, cause and effect, and past and future lives. But what we have to understand is this is not specific to Buddhism. This is what is called, in the Buddha Dharma at least, the highest worldly view. So in order to be a spiritual practitioner on the spiritual path, what is taught is that you have to have this highest worldly view. And this is a belief in karma, cause and effect, and past and future lives. And so this permeates all of the Buddhist tradition. Basically, if you don't believe in this, you're not even starting as a Buddhist. But even really, to be a Hindu practitioner, then you have to have a belief in karma, cause and effect, and past and future lives. There's a little bit of a difficulty there, and that's because for people who follow the dual Vedas, then everything is accountable to God, right? Everything is down to the will of God. And so in some ways, this slightly contradicts the teachings on karma. But in the Buddha Dharma, at least, then it's quite kind of literal. It means that karma dictates everything, and there is no other influence that has power over karma, not even an enlightened Buddha. Now, there is some difference in how this is presented in the 3 vehicles. So as I told you, there's the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. And in the Hinayana, then the primary difference is one of view. And this is a really important point. What makes distinction between these different vehicles is their kind of final or resultant view. And in general, in the Buddha Dharma, then there's 4 principal views. And in the kind of what we call the lower or the foundational vehicle, then there is this belief that material objects, these outer material objects, are real in the sense that they're composed of quantum particles. So they're composed of indivisible atoms. So essentially they're quantum particles because they're one-dimensional and they don't have sides, is what it means, put it simply. And exactly how those can be made composed into larger phenomena is a topic of debate, but it's very similar to how modern physicists debate this point. For example, if one-dimensional particles touch, then you wouldn't be able to make up a substantial outer object because they would always overlap, they would dissolve into each other. So there's a lot of debate about this. I won't bore you with it, it's going to go on forever and ever. And then for the Hinayana tradition, they see consciousness to be made up of discrete or quantum time moments. Okay, so this matter is made out of real atoms, and consciousness is made out of real quantum time moments. And why do I say this? It's because within the Theravadan tradition, then there needs to be something that is substantial that passes from one life to the next. And what passes from one life to the next in the foundational vehicle is consciousness. And consciousness is said to be itself not substantial, but it's said to be made up of real time moments. So there's these time or consciousness moments, and there's a mind-body division, right? This is classical analysis and philosophy. So how does this affect the way we see things in the Mahayana? Well, that's because all of the higher levels of Buddhism, or from the middle up, let's say, above the foundation, for example, the first of those, being the mind-only school, believes that there are no outer objects. So if there are no outer objects, then the whole question of reincarnation becomes different. In a world where there are real outer objects, you need something that passes from one life to another, right? From one realm to another, from one kind of form of existence to another. But in the mind-only school, and this is what is synonymous with the Eastern tradition, so Chinese, Korean, and Japanese Buddhism, then they believe there is only mind. And then the outer world is a projection. And what is being projected? It's the imprints that are stored in the alaya consciousness, ripen and create karmic perception. And so it's a little bit simpler when you get to the Mahayana, because you don't need this vehicle or this mechanism by which this me, this person, individual, can pass from one life to another, because all appearances are merely a fabrication of our mind and based on our imputations and our habituation. Then when we get to the Vajrayana, it becomes more complicated. And in general, everything in the Vajrayana is very complicated, because they almost sounds like in the Vajrayana, then they're contradicting what was taught in the Mahayana. So they're associated with these three vehicles, Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. There are what are called the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So these are the three times that the Buddha taught the Dharma after becoming enlightened. And the first one was in the deer park at Varanasi, and that's where the Buddha taught about the Four Noble Truths, taught about suffering, and this is the view of the Theravadan. And then at a later time, the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, then the Buddha taught about emptiness and bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is what we call loving kindness and compassion. And so the focus slightly shifts. And it's said that this teaching on emptiness was very difficult for people who had natural disposition for the foundational vehicle, Four Noble Truths, Theravadan tradition, to listen to. Some of them would vomit up blood, they said, because they thought it was a nihilistic view, basically. But what we understand is the Buddha taught the middle way. So this non-existence or nihilism is refuted, but also substantial existence is refuted. So the view of emptiness is not nihilism, but it is difficult for some to accept, and it's not suitable for everyone. It depends on your disposition, the way you think. So again, this belief in emptiness kind of shapes the way that the Mahayana Dharma has been taught. And then we come to the Vajrayana, then they almost teach the exact opposite, because they say that this consciousness is perfect and pure and unchanging. And in fact, it's everything that is refuted in earlier teachings of the Buddha Dharma. But the truth is that one does not contradict or refute the other. The truth is that the ultimate meaning is this middle way that doesn't fall to existence and non-existence. But because language and human interaction can only be thought of in a conceptual way, a linguistic way, that it has to be taught from either the position of appearance or the position of emptiness. And the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma teaches from the aspect of non-existence or emptiness, and the Vajrayana teaches from the aspect of appearing phenomena, as if it exists. But the truth is, it's not that it exists, but that we're kind of pointing at something, like a finger pointing at the moon. The finger itself is needing as something to direct us towards understanding wisdom. So in the Vajrayana, then they talk about perfect purity of mind, unborn nature, and then we visualize Buddhas and consorts in union and heavenly palaces and this sort of thing. And so in some ways, it almost seems to be a kind of deity worship practice and totally contradictory. But as I said before, it's actually the same view. It's just being presented from the side of appearance. So there, then what they teach is that there is no rebirth. There are no past and future lives. There is only primordial wisdom that was ever present and permeates all phenomena. But based on our misconception and ignorance, then we experience the mundane world. To give you a brief explanation.
No, I appreciate it. It seems like dogma always finds its way into religions and groups. And is there dogma in Buddhism?
So if we look at the definition of dogma, it means incontrovertible truth. So this is very important. So if that is the case, then you would have to say, well, actually, dogma doesn't exist in the Buddha Dharma, right? So it's a truth that has to be accepted on the basis of some religious authority and cannot be contravened. So if you say that, then I would say no. And the reason why I'll say that is the famous quote from the Buddha. The Buddha said, "Do not accept what I said out of mere faith or reverence, but analyze it the way a goldsmith analyzes gold, by cutting, rubbing, and burning it, to see if it is authentic or not." So what the Buddha did was encourage his followers to analyze what they've been taught, to actually test the teachings and to see if they're real or not. And this is one of the main reasons why I became a Buddhist initially. It's because no other religion that I was presented with gave me this choice to use my own reasoning and also to have the freedom to analyze and not rely on blind faith. So the Buddha taught that you shouldn't have blind faith. You should look into it for yourself. So from that aspect, then you could say there is no dogma. But at the same time, then the Buddha taught these principal truths, for example, the four truths, the two truths, the single truth, etc. And although Buddhists might kind of look down on you if you rejected these, but we are actually encouraged to debate. So what we do often, you'll see them, the monks will sort of do this thing, and they're going to be shouting at each other. I don't know if you've ever seen it in Dharmasala. They do it a lot. And what they're doing is they're debating, or they're arguing against their own belief system. So it's highly encouraged within the Buddha Dharma. But from the aspect of there being what we accept to be incontrovertible truths, then I would say, yes, there is dogma. But it's not dogma. It's what's called ultimate truth. And it's undeniable. For example, we believe that karma is infallible. Mm. But we don't expect anyone to accept that. And from my position, how I approach things is that I try not to tell people the way things are or ask them to believe me. Generally what I do is I put up a proposition or something that might be a paradox or a doubt that might exist commonly within spiritual practitioners and people who are seekers of the truth, and use that as a springboard to encourage discourse and discussion, broaden the conversation in order to deepen our own understanding and experience.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's why I'm attracted to Buddhism. I think I love that. It's mysterious to me. It's hard to understand at times, but it kind of speaks to me at the same time. So I appreciate it.
Well, one thing to understand is that although it sounds very complex, that the complexity is taught in relationship to the disposition of the student. So the ultimate truth of Buddha Dharma is what's called utter simplicity. And it really is the case. And you can see this when you look at the iconography that's presented in the Buddha Dharma. And there's different kind of manifestations. For example, you have the sort of Theravada monks, and they're almost naked with very simple clothing. And it's all very down to earth, right? They sit under trees, etc. And then you'll see these pictures that come from the sort of Vajrayana or the tantric practices, where they're all ornate with all kinds of complexity, etc. So deities with crowns and silks and all this sort of stuff. But at the same time, then in the Vajrayana, you'll see these images of Samantabhadra. Now, Samantabhadra is just simply naked. It's a Buddha figure naked. And you will see this often in the tantric practices. And this isn't because they're promoting sort of nudism. It's because it's seeing that the ultimate view is this one that is stripped of all conceptual imputations. It's beyond all elaboration. That is the core principle of the Buddha Dharma. But in order to come to understand that, then some people need either renunciation, other people need to do a lot of study, some people need to do a lot of training and meditation, etc. There are different types of individuals, and so the Buddha taught 84,000 different types of methods.
You know, you hear a lot about the Dalai Lama, like this is the last Dalai Lama. Is that true?
Well, no, it's not true. And it's slightly... You have to understand that the Dalai Lama is dealing with a huge disinformation campaign that's coming primarily from China. And so a lot of what he says is to counter their narrative. For example, the Dalai Lama said famously a few years ago, "Oh, I'm going to be around for 110 years. I'll live till I'm 110." And he was saying that really to counter the dialogue that was going on at the time, that the Dalai Lama is very old, he's going to die soon, and we need to find a new Dalai Lama, and all that sort of thing. And then he said, well, I'm going to reincarnate before I die. So he was going to appoint somebody before he dies. But the reason for him to say that is because what the Chinese government is trying to do is to install their own puppet Dalai Lama, who supposedly will have the only person to have authority within mainland China. And so when you hear what is said, then you have to take it with a pinch of salt. Now, it is true that reincarnate lamas do choose not to be reborn. And this is something to do with the bodhisattva path. So it's important to understand. So a bodhisattva, and we're talking about a bodhisattva on the levels, has already left samsara, has already left the mundane world. But they have the ability to incarnate at will. And generally, they choose to incarnate in places where they can be of benefit. And that might even be in hell realms, or, where there's trouble on the battlefield, they may incarnate as a bridge, etc. And so also famously, then some sort of incarnate lamas, tokus, bodhisattvas have chosen not to return. So this is something that we hear from time from time to time. But the Dalai Lama hasn't chosen not to return. And there's another thing that often happens, and you see this in the history in Tibet, is that a Lama will reincarnate secretly and do so for many lifetimes. So I don't know, but my guess is that if it's appropriate, then the Dalai Lama will reincarnate secretly. And then as times improve and the geopolitical situation changes, then in future times will declare their reincarnation. And this is something that's happened in our recent history. It's quite common. But I doubt that it would be the end of the actual Dalai Lama lineage, except for in terms of politics. The Dalai Lama was known to be the secular and religious leader of Tibet. So famously, he held these two crowns. He was basically the king of Tibet, but he was also the kind of religious leader of Tibet. And quite a long time ago, then the Dalai Lama sort of decided to retire or opt out of the political side. And this was really for the benefit of the Tibetan people. It's because he knew that the Chinese had a real problem with him. That's the government. I mean, many Chinese people, the citizens, follow the Dalai Lama, are very faithful to the Dalai Lama. But in terms of politics, then he saw it to be much more beneficial if he just opted out of politics. And in the same way, then he may choose to opt out of the religious side. And then they would, somebody else would become the leader. Sometimes it's suggested that the Karmapa would then become the leader because he's the second most popular kind of religious leader in Tibet. But we'll have to see.
Yeah, thank you. I'm listening to his voice in my head, and I always hear him laugh. He seems very blissful and happy. He sounds like Yoda in a way to me from Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the some of the characters in Star Wars speak Tibetan. They're actually using the Tibetan language. These little furry creatures, I can't remember what they're called, but they speak Tibetan. And when you know Tibetan, it sounds really strange because suddenly you see this Star Wars movie and they're speaking Tibetan. But this is a characteristic of many Tibetan lamas and rinpoches. It's through their practice, then they develop what's called bodhicitta, this loving kindness and compassion. And also, they're on the paths and levels, like the Dalai Lama is on the upper stage of the path of accumulation. And along with that come various qualities. And one of these qualities is joy. And also with this understanding and realization of emptiness, then there is no longer suffering. So often they can seem, sometimes even inappropriately, kind of funny, where they'll joke at inappropriate times or they'll laugh about a situation that other people seem to think is inappropriate, but it's merely because they've lost all kind of clinging to negativity. And this is certainly the case with the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama has a very high level of intellectual understanding, a very high level of realization in terms of practitioners in the modern world. And also he has this naturally kind of disposition, this Mahayana disposition, which exudes love and compassion.
Yeah, I heard him give a talk maybe, I don't know, some years back. It was like when might have been his 85th birthday or something in Anaheim, California. And it was pretty packed, but he had a lot of protesters, a lot of Christians, protesting against the Dalai Lama. And which made me kind of confused because all he does is preach peace and unity and love, in my opinion. And I don't see no reason to protest the Dalai Lama. But I love him.
Yeah, not everyone is as open-minded as you are, Boo Boo. And unfortunately, we have to have compassion for individuals who act in this way. This is something I covered on a recent short that I did for my YouTube channel. And it's not always certain if the message gets across, but basically, we have to try to be decent human beings first. Often people are always searching for, awakening and all these sort of things, but without first getting their own house in order, right? And this is something that's very important because the foundation of spiritual practice is first being an exemplary human being. It's not as if you can go from being somebody who's very troubled, very small-minded, to gaining spiritual attainment. In fact, there are attainments that are brought about through the influence of demons or negative forces, you could say. Really what they are, they're our own kleshas, but they influence us towards negativity. And so there are many very negative religious groups. And I have to say in general, then Christians are absolutely wonderful. But there is a contingent within any religious tradition of people who have got the wrong idea and that it only fuels their prejudice. So they profess the love of Jesus, for example, but they don't have even love for their own brothers and sisters. And so this is a fallacy. This is a real problem.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it made me confused because it said it says in the Bible, "Blessed are the peacemakers."
Mhm.
And what do you
Yeah,
think he's doing? Preaching hate? But
yeah, yeah. Certainly, Jesus didn't preach hate.
um,
It's an interesting point, actually, because we see Jesus to have been a bodhisattva. And I find it difficult. I'm a bit wary of actually saying that out loud. Because if I say that to a Christian, then it sounds like an insult. It sounds like I'm demoting Jesus from the position of God to a bodhisattva. But for a Buddhist, it's the highest claim that you can give. It's the highest kind of position that you can have. They say bodhisattvas are even more important than Buddhas because it's only from a bodhisattva that a Buddha is born. And so we see that what Jesus brought to the Abrahamic religions, Semitic religions of the Middle East and North Africa was these teachings on loving compassion, and that there was a big sea change from the time of the Judaic religion as it transformed into Christianity. There was a heavy change in focus to love and compassion. And it's interesting because for around 30 years, then Jesus Christ disappeared from the scene, right? And many people say that Jesus Christ traveled to northern India, Ladakh, and this sort of Persian area, and studied religion and philosophy at that time. And what was prevalent at the time when Jesus Christ was probably actually born, which is a little bit earlier than we think, it's about 70 BC, it's not really this beginning of the Common Era, that this was really prevalent in northern India and Persia. As a primary kind of religion was this Mahayana Buddhism.
yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because when I first read what a bodhisattva was, automatically said, "Oh, that Jesus was one." You know,
Yeah, we think so.
and I love just having an open mind and heart and trying to learn from everything and filter in stuff and just using my own intuition and connect the
Mm.
dots, because there's universal
Oh,
truth.
so you're a Buddhist then? I'm going to use your own intuition and be open-hearted. I once asked my teacher Akong Rinpoche, I said, "What's a bodhisattva?" And he doesn't have very good English, and he's very sort of pithy when he says something. He said, "Accept everything, soft mind, warm heart." So I said that was it. That's all you need.
I think Thich Nhat Hanh. Did
Mm.
you ever get to meet Thich Nhat Hanh? I mean,
No, never had the opportunity. And when I was in retreat, I guess he passed away. Some friends of mine used to go and stay at Plum Village, and I read uh, some of his books previously when I was a yoga teacher. The Anapanasati, the one on Anapanasati, I think it's mindfulness of breath or something like that. And I found that quite influential for me. I really like his teachings, and also likewise the Zen teachings from Suzuki were
yeah,
influential. This beginner's mind, very helpful to me. Of course, and then more recently, since I learnt Tibetan, became fluent in Tibetan, then all the teachings we receive are in the original language. And so we kind of don't really interact very much with teachings in English anymore, because when you go to the actual root of those teachings, then it's far more profound, right? Because you lose a lot through translation. So really, for many years now, I haven't seen anything in English.
yeah. Thich Nhat Hanh was a good friends, or he was friends with Martin Luther King and Thomas
Oh,
Merton.
yeah.
And in his writings, he wrote Martin Luther King was a bodhisattva.
Mm,
He just loved him, and he talked about being really sad and angry when he died and what happened to him.
yeah.
So I think
That's
once
the
you,
impression I got also for Martin Luther King from listening to his speeches. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. You often see the swastika on the Buddha,
Mm-hmm.
in statues and stuff. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
can give us an understanding of what the swastika really meant, because anytime people see
Mm-hmm.
the swastika, they see like
Mm-hmm.
Hitler.
Mm-hmm. So what we have to understand is even this word swastika is actually Sanskrit. Swasti means kind of auspicious, right? And what is the swastika? Because there's two, right? Right? There's a Deosil and a Widershins. When you talk about the German one, there's the right turning one and there's the left turning one. The other thing that's important to understand is it's the oldest extant religious symbol that's found anywhere in the world. So when they see these old rock carvings and things like that, the very first kind of symbol that we find is this swastika. So it's also like North America. It goes back so far that it was predates the time when sort of people came from Asia into North America, and it's even extant there. And so, as I said, the auspicious one, the swastik, is going to the right. And what it is the way the sun turns. So if you have a sundial, it moves in a rightward angle. And then the leftward is against the grain. And so in Northern shamanism, this leftward one, because again, they have a kind of non-dual view if you look at it ultimately in this Northern shamanism. It's not about good and bad. But there are certain practices that go against the grain. So wrathful practices, for example. And this is the left-turning swastika, which is the one that the Nazis used. So this right-turning one doesn't belong to Germany, it doesn't belong to the sort of fascist movement, but it was something that was really prevalent in India at the time of the Buddha. And if you look at the Mahabharata, whatever his name is, the Jain leader, then he often has on his heart also the swastika. So it's a religious symbol. Now in Tibetan, we have this yongdrung. We have the term as yongdrung, and it means swastika. And the meaning of this is the ultimate truth. So this is the actual meaning of the swastika. And so we've got what are called the three natures, if you've ever heard of them, and this is especially in the Eastern traditions, Mahayana Buddhism. And then we talk about the thoroughly imputed nature, other dependent nature, and then this ultimate nature. And the ultimate nature is the yongdrung, it's the swastika. So it kind of represents this cosmic harmony where everything is auspicious. Total, it really means total auspiciousness. And if you go into Korea, then all the temples have a swastika painted on the side. So, but it is strange. And many people in the West have a knee-jerk reaction to this. But I think if you've spent time in India, then you very quickly lose that, because you can just see that it's only a positive thing. But as I said, there's the right turning wheel and there's the left turning wheel. And the left turning wheel is associated with the work of the destroyer, like Kali and that sort of thing. So it's kind of things that we do have to be careful of. But in terms of the right turning wheel, the auspicious wheel, then there is nothing to be afraid of. It is the ultimate truth itself.
Yeah, thank you. The word nirvana, that's been pretty popular in the West these days. What does the word nirvana mean, the original meaning?
So we've got samsara and nirvana. And these are like two sides of the coin. And again, when we look at samsara and nirvana, as I said at the beginning, any question you ask about Buddhism, then you have to look at it in the context of the view. And so in terms of the foundational view, then samsara is the mundane world. And not only that, it's described in the Abhidharma. So this is one of the principal topics of Buddhism. It's one of the three baskets in great detail from the hell realms up. And so what you hear is this term, those that live on the earth, below the earth, and above the earth. And this describes what we call samsara. And the ones who live in the middle on the earth are the human beings, our realm. This is very important. It's about understanding our position in the cosmos. And then those who live below the earth are those who are so severely afflicted by their negative karma that they have no respite in various different ways. But because of that, they can't really practice the Buddha Dharma. And so this Abhidharma talks about the levels of existence of samsara, and it starts in the lowest realms. Of course, this is kind of metaphorical, right? It's like an analogy. But in the foundational vehicles, it's taken literally. Right? This is important to understand that the literal truth and the actual truth are different. We've got the provisional, we've got the ultimate. We've got the quantum world, and we've got classical interpretation. So these are all related, method and wisdom. There's no difference here. So when we tell these stories about hell, humans, and then these God realms that are above, well, there's God realms that extend up to the peak of existence, and all of these are seen to be within the wheel of samsara. So samsara means turning, or it means wheel. And we tend to think if we get to the peak of existence in the highest God realm, then we should be we've got to the end of our goal. But what is taught in the Buddha Dharma is that once your positive karma in these higher heavenly realms is exhausted, then you fall back down into samsara and you continue to churn. So lifetime after lifetime, you will go from one existence to another. And then nirvana is seen as like heaven or transcendence. So nirvana is when you go beyond samsara. It's when you transcend the mundane world. And with that, then there's no returning. There is some debate because there's a type of arahat who is able to return to samsara. But in general, once you've become liberated, then you've achieved nirvana. And nirvana is like peace. It's taught to be a cooling of your negativities. Now, often what happens is we think of nirvana as some kind of heaven. It's like gaining entrance into heaven. We're going to a pure realm, like a Buddha pure realm or something like that. But again, this is kind of metaphorical. It's like an analogy. It's a story that we tell. Really, what we're talking about is that somebody who goes beyond their conceptual imputations and realizes non-dual wisdom, then is no longer afflicted by the mundane world. Now, if we look at a different analysis of this, we have to think about what is liberation, what is awakening. And in terms of all spiritual paths, then all spiritual paths are about removing clinging. It's about removing clinging and about to the extent in which we remove clinging. Now, you can remove clinging. For example, in this life, I had some really bad trauma and it plagues me. It always gives me problems and I can never forget it. And I can remove that clinging to that trauma, but still be within samsara. But my mundane world will be much happier and I'll be much more at ease. So there's this removing mundane trauma. And then there is a point at which you reduce all clinging to the existence of self. And this reducing all clinging to existence of self is the state of liberation. That's when you achieve nirvana. But it's not a fully enlightened Buddha. It just means that you don't suffer in the mundane world anymore. So in terms of this, then we see that samsara isn't really a place. Because remember, a bodhisattva can be reborn in samsara, but they don't suffer. But samsara is, as long as we cling to the notion of a self, then we will have suffering. And then the individual who has transcended their self-clinging, has realized the truth of no self, then experiences only joy, because the cause of suffering is self-clinging. So samsara means mundane. What is mundane? As long as there is self-clinging. And nirvana means transcendence or peace. And what is peace? Peace is when you've gone beyond clinging to self. That's another way of thinking about it. But then when you get to the Vajrayana, again, then they say, well, there is no difference between samsara and nirvana. They're both the same. They're both perfectly pure. So seemingly contradictory, but actually the message isn't different. It depends on the disposition or the ability of the practitioner.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you brought up trauma, and I love talking about trauma. And we talked about reincarnation and stuff. Do you believe we can bring in past life trauma?
Well, if you're a Buddhist, as I said, you need the highest worldly view, right? So if you have the highest worldly view, then that means you're absolutely certain that it will pass from lifetime to lifetime. Now, in general, then science tells us that we experience trauma, and then that can be imprinted on our DNA, and we can pass it on to our next generation. But we very much think about these things in terms of one lifetime, right? We're born, and we kind of have this funny idea that we're more or less a blank sheet, but we're kind of shaped by our genetics. And then we will experience things like this circumstances. So we've got genetics, and we've got the circumstances in which we're in, the environment, and this environment will shape us and cause us to experience trauma. And then we can sort of do things to get rid of that trauma. But it all happens in the span of one lifetime. Now, the problem is, when we are born, we have a very fixed personality. And not only that, but if you take identical twins, so identical twins share identical genetics. Their genetics are identical, but also their epigenome, so their genome is identical, absolutely 100% identical, but the epigenome is also almost identical. It doesn't change significantly because their environment is almost exactly the same, right? And then this epigenome only changes slowly over time, over decades. Their personalities start to move apart. But the twins, when they're born, almost 100% of the time, have got totally different personalities. So the classical scientific explanation does not explain how we have personality at birth. And what the Buddha Dharma teaches is that, well, we've habituated ourselves over lifetime, over lifetime. So not only is our personality kind of very distinct when we're born, and that has been shaped by past lifetimes, but it has been so many lifetimes that it is very solid, this personality. In order to undo our negative habituation, then it's very difficult. And that's because we've been habituating for lifetime after lifetime. If we follow the scientific model, then we've only had 9 months in the womb in order to create some kind of environmental changes. And other than that, it's all down to genetics. And as we can see, that doesn't explain it. So if you've had trauma, as you say, let's say in the last lifetime, you've had a trauma, and then it will manifest in this life. And actually, it's nearly been proven scientifically to manifest physically in this lifetime. So if you look at the University of Virginia, there's been a study on personality by some really serious scientists. And what they did was they took reincarnation stories, modern ones. And so they took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different cases. And of course, many of them were fakes or they didn't have conclusive evidence. But they kind of searched through all of this evidence until they found the strongest cases. And for these strongest cases, it was almost conclusive evidence, which, as you can see, is going to be very difficult to go from one lifetime to the next. But basically, I'll give you an example. There was a young boy who was working with his father, who was a thresher, and then he was helping his father, and the threshing machine cut the child's fingers off. So that's a traumatic experience, right? That shapes that person. And for his family, it was very traumatic. His father never forgave himself, so it was a really traumatic experience. Now, he was reborn in the next lifetime, and he was reborn with a deformity, which mimicked the sort of severing of his fingers almost identically. So he had this physical outward expression of the trauma that he expressed, but also he had all his memories from his past life, and the regret, and he remembered his father, how bad he felt, and all that sort of thing. And so all of the stories in this research are like that. One person was accidentally shot in the head, and then they were born with the side of the head all deformed. Now, the thing about these deformities, they weren't common deformities. They're very rare types of deformities that don't normally come about. And also, there was no history in their family of having any kind of deformity. So it carried through as an actual physical manifestation, but also in their personality in this lifetime. So yes, I have 100% belief in that. But more importantly is, in the teachings of karma, is that there are called the results that are similar to the cause, right? And there's the results that are the ripening of the cause. So in the past lifetime, let's say we are a butcher, right? We're somebody who's like killing animals all day long. And so what we do is we habituate ourselves to this act of killing. And that means in this lifetime, we will like to hunt or fish or kill animals. You see, some people are like this. And then there's the other result, which is that because we killed in previous lifetimes, then in this lifetime, then we will experience short life or disease, for example, cancer, that sort of thing. So the way it's taught in the Buddha Dharma anyway is very specific. And I have no doubt in that. But sometimes we identify with trauma as if it's something that is being inflicted upon us. And this is a difficult point. And I understand it's a difficult point in the West and in general on the teachings of karma, cause, and effect. And that's because if you say, why did I get cancer? And you say to them, oh, it's your karma. Then people will think like you're blaming the victim. We have this kind of feeling. It's like, what are you saying? It's my fault? Which is really difficult because this is what the Buddha Dharma teaches, right? And a lot of people have this knee-jerk reaction. They don't like it. The thing is, though, as somebody who understands karma, cause, and effect won't feel like they're being blamed. Because what they'll come to understand is we've all had countless lifetimes. Countless lifetimes. And that means all of us have done all kinds of things. The absolute worst things you can imagine. And what that means is that anything could manifest in this life, right? I could have disease, I could have sickness. And it's not about feeling like, well, I need to be blamed for this. But if you have an understanding of karma, cause, and effect, what the experience you'll have is, well, of course I'm going to get ill. And what does that mean? That means you will accept it. And so that this hardship won't traumatize you. Do you see what I mean? So actually, to come to understanding karma, cause, and effect is very liberating. It's a very positive thing. But sadly, often in the West, we see it to be quite negative, as if we're being blamed for. And so it's the same with trauma. We feel like we've been inflicted by trauma. But the sort of a Buddhist way of thinking it is, oh, I must be more careful in this lifetime, because I must have somehow hurt that person who caused me pain, etc. I did something myself to do this. And so ultimately what it does is it encourages people to be virtuous and always to be forgiving, accepting, to be grateful. All these positive qualities come from a belief in karma, cause, and effect.
Yeah, thank you. I had a past life reading one time, and the lady knew nothing about me, and she described my personality in the present. But she said I was a Tibetan monk that was defiant. And she described me in today's world, in the present life, and I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's quite common, actually, defiant Tibetan monks. Tibetans have a particular character or personality. And you see this in the different traditions. This sort of cultural kind of, the cultural framework really influences the way they practice religion. And Tibetans, especially from eastern Tibet, this area called Kham, it's like the Wild West of Tibet. Then they're all a bit crazy. So there's lots of interesting stories.
Yeah, thank you. If I was to tell somebody in the West, like a Christian friend, if you see Jesus, kill him, they would probably think I'm crazy. But there's a saying in Buddhism, if you meet the Buddha, kill him.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, it's not literally about killing the Buddha, but it's about clinging to reality. Now, this is something you asked me at the beginning of the podcast: is what is Buddha? So ultimately, in the highest level of the view, then Buddha is the nature of your own mind.
Mm.
So the Buddha isn't a historical figure. The Buddha isn't, a deity. What the Buddha is called Buddha nature, this unborn wisdom. And it is the essential nature of all beings. It's called the Tathagata Garbha. So these are the teachings from what is called the Uttara Tantra, and that means the highest yoga tantra. And again, as I said, when you ask any question in the Buddha Dharma, you have to look in what context is this? First turning the wheel of Dharma, second turning the wheel of Dharma, third turning the wheel of Dharma. Is it the Kriya Tantra? Is it the conduct Tantra? Is it the Yoga Tantra? Is it the highest Yoga Tantra? And then in that context, you get a different answer. So ultimately, and this teaching itself comes from Zen Buddhism. So if we're in Zen Buddhism, then the primary aspect is the second turning the wheel of Dharma. That's the teachings on emptiness and bodhicitta. And also they teach the Buddha nature. And so it's identification of the Buddha as something external is what needs to be gotten rid of. And you see this in Tibetan Buddhism as well. They have sayings like you need to kill the father and the mother. And people think, what is this horrible religion? But it's not literal. It's codified. In the past, then the higher teachings were never taught directly. And there's a reason for that. There's what are called these two secrets. So one is what is naturally obscured. So that's something that doesn't appear to our mind because we haven't got the requisite wisdom or intelligence. And there's that which needs to be hidden. And the reason why it needs to be hidden is because it's dangerous teaching people high views if they don't understand them. If I say there's no good and bad, many people say that, right? We hear that a lot. Mm-hmm. Everything is perfect, there's no good and bad. Well, somebody who hasn't got spiritual knowledge could think, oh, that's great, I can go rob a bank, or I can kill my neighbor. And so, so when you read life stories, especially in the Tibetan tradition, then there's all this kind of codified secret teaching. If you've heard of I think it's on my video channel, the story of Tilopa. And so he does all these horrible things to his student. And you think, what on earth is he doing? There's like nothing to do with the Buddha Dharma here. He's just being horrible to him. He's just using him like a plaything. But all of it is actually about kind of the way we dismantle our conceptual imputations. So, for example, in there, then there's talking about kidnapping a bride. Well, females represent the wisdom aspect of mind, and males represent the kind of method aspect of mind. So all of this is a codification. So when they say like kill the mother, etc., they're talking about this unborn wisdom. So mother and son, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's not literal. And of course, exactly what the master meant when they make these koans or they make these sayings is under debate, right? Nobody absolutely agrees on this. But in general, then it's seen that this identification as the Buddha as being something external is your actual obstacle to enlightenment. You have to recognize that it is the unborn nature phenomena that it persists in every moment of perception and not something separate from that.
The Christian mystic Miser Eckhart, and thank you for...
Oh, yeah.
He said something very similar in a Christian terms, obviously, and he says, I pray God to rid me of God.
And, very good. Excellent.
I thought that was beautiful. Yeah, it's same truth.
Yeah,
same truth.
Yeah. I think so. And also, there's a thing. There's some of these truths are, you could say, the same or they're similar, and only in order to understand the difference, then you have to understand the view a bit more closely. So, and that's what we do in the Buddha Dharma a lot, is we study different views. We study Hindu tradition, we study the Jains, we study the Samkhya, all these different traditions, we study the different levels of the Buddha Dharma. And we do this in order to be more clear on what the different views are. In fact, that's why we debate, to be more clear about what is actually being said. Now, this itself doesn't cause enlightenment or awakening, but it kind of prepares the ground. It helps one approach a conceptual understanding of the truth, and then through practice, one can make a kind of leap through moment into recognizing that truth. And that's the important thing. There's methods that lead to wisdom, and those methods are all different. They're all different in the different kind of traditions. But ultimately, what we're looking for is this wisdom.
Thank you. You often hear people say, well, if the Buddhists don't believe in God, who do they pray to?
Yeah, prayer is slightly different in the Buddha Dharma. So we talk about taking refuge, right? So we see God to be the ultimate, responsible for everything, and everything depends on God. Then it makes a lot of sense to pray to God. For example, I want to win the lottery or something like that. Then if God's in charge, then it makes sense to pray to God. But in the Buddha Dharma, really, we don't do that. What we do is we pray to get rid of our own negativities. We pray to develop wisdom. But it's not something, again, that's going to be given. The Buddha famously said that I can merely teach you the path to enlightenment, but you have to walk that path yourself. And so really it's very much about that individual and what they can do. Also, the Buddha said that water will not wash away your sins. I cannot sort of give you any special realization. It can't be given. It's something that has to be developed by oneself. So we don't really pray like that. But then again, as I said when we started this, you have to look at the various different levels of view. And I would have to say that probably 90% or more, 95% of all Buddhists aren't really Buddhists, ultimately. In order to be a Buddhist, you have to hold the Buddhist view. And if you hold the Buddhist view, then that includes these 4 seals that signify the true Dharma, or the 4 pillars of the Dharma. They're the cornerstone principles. But if you go to the Himalayan mountains, of Tibet and Nepal, etc., in India, and you see how people practice there, the villagers, the yak herders, then for them, Buddhism is theism, really. Also in China, it's the same. They go to the temple, they light incense, they offer flowers, and they pray to Buddha that they'll do well in business, or that their son will get a good mark at university. So really, ultimately, it's not kind of kosher Buddhism, but it's still important. It's taught that we need a certain amount of blind faith. For example, we have to believe that there's something other than this world. We don't know why that is, but initially we have to have this conviction. And then we go searching for answers. And if we're brought up in a Christian society, then we're already given that from birth. We have something there. We have a context we can relate to. And for that, then we need to sort of invest a certain amount of blind faith. But ultimately, what we need is realization. And realization is informed faith. It's not blind faith. And so these things are useful. The other thing is, and this is generally what is taught in the Buddha Dharma, is having an existential view, so that's like a theistic view, is far better than having a nihilistic view. So the Hindus, the Jains, the Christians, Muslims, they all have theistic views. There's this ultimate source that is a real thing, it's permanent and pure, creator of the entire universe, and that's what we call a view of existence. And then the nihilists are the Charvakas, so the Lokiyatas, or what you call the hedonists. They don't believe in anything. So it's taught that having an existential view leads to rebirth in divine realms, so experiences of well-being, right? So having this faith in God. What do you have faith in God? You have faith in love, right? You have faith in compassion and tolerance. So these are all positive things. This means that you're creating very strong positive karma, which leads to rebirth in godlike states, whatever you want to call them, whether you want to call them heaven up in the clouds, or if it's just experiences of bliss, in the mundane world. That's not transcendence, but it's a start, right? And it's far better than the result of nihilism. And unfortunately, in the Western world, then most people fall to the side of nihilism. Misunderstanding the teachings of physics and science, they see that to be the ultimate result of that to mean that everything happens randomly without a cause, that there is no causality. We misinterpret the teachings on quantum uncertainty to mean that things just happen randomly, but it's not that. It's exactly the opposite, but people don't understand that. And then because we develop this nihilistic view, what do? We take an AR-15 and we go into the shopping mall and we kill lots of people because it's like nothing matters, right? People very much have this idea. It's like, well, I'm just here randomly. God didn't create me. There's no purpose or meaning in life. We're just a sort of consequence of random changes in the universe. So what difference does it make? When I die, I'm gone. And nihilism is very dangerous. And this is what was taught thousands of years ago in the Buddha Dharma.
Yeah, thank you. I read something on Thich Nhat Hanh one time, and he says the Buddha wasn't against God. He was against all the mental constructions, the concepts, and the belief systems that come with that block us from the ultimate reality. What would be the ultimate reality he's talking about?
So first, the Buddha wasn't against anything. The Buddha famously said, worldly people have got a problem with me. I have no problem with worldly people. Now, this ultimate view within Buddhism is what we call the ultimate truth, or the Dharmakaya. Right? So we have the manifest world and we have the ultimate truth. And as I said earlier in this conversation, then we have provisional, ultimate, method, wisdom, right? The two truths. And we see these to be separate. So this side of the ultimate is the difficult one. It's what we call the Dharmakaya. And it's similar to what is taught in Christian theology. We are not able to connect directly with God or the ultimate. Right? Ordinary beings are not able to connect with the infinite, the way they describe it in the Vedic traditions. And it's similar in the Buddha Dharma. So this kind of ultimate way things are that we wish to achieve is something that's beyond conceptual imputation, inaccessible to the ordinary mind. And so this is why Thich Nhat Hanh is talking about getting rid of this conceptualization. He understands this because he himself was a really good meditator, right? So he understands the purpose of this. Now, if you say, what is that ultimate? Then again, you have to refer to the different levels of view. And as I said before, right? So you know of this shamatha and vipassana meditation, I think? Have you heard of them?
Yeah, I have.
Placement meditation and insight meditation. And so this insight is the wisdom side. And so what is insight or wisdom changes through the different levels of the vehicles. In the Theravada, then the ultimate truth is the four truths. It's the truth of suffering and the truth of no self, this sort of thing. In the middle turning the wheel, it's the truth of emptiness and the truth of bodhicitta. And in the Vajrayana, or the third turning the wheel, and we say the highest level of teaching, but it's not trying to be biased about it. It's like in a pyramid, maybe you can think about it. You need the foundation, you need all of them, is this recognition of the clear light nature of mind, or luminosity. And so also, I think it's quite famous as progressive path and direct path, a lot of people talk about. Well, this direct side, or what's called in the Kashmir Shaivik tradition, is the path of Shiva, is recognition of wisdom. And this is non-dual wisdom. Now, so what is that? Well, it's described differently. Okay, the Dharmakaya isn't really accepted in the lower vehicles, but let's say, what is this kind of non-dual wisdom? And it's described as non-referential compassion that is free of the 8 elaborations. So it's something that's completely beyond elaboration. And why is it called non-referential compassion? It's because it is emptiness that is embraced by compassion. Now we have a kind of problem here. And that is, if everything is empty and sentient beings don't exist, then how is it that we work for the benefit of beings? And this is something that stumps a lot of people. We have bodhisattvas who are supposed to have realized the true nature of phenomena, which is the lack of existence of the self of the individual and the lack of existence of phenomena in terms of having an identity or a self. But at the same time, they continue to work for the benefit of beings until they reach the pure levels. Whatever topic you get into, it just gets more and more complicated. But essentially, it's this understanding of how can there be appearance and emptiness? How can there be bliss and emptiness? How is it that there is this middle way between existence and non-existence? And now the one thing that's given me the greatest hope in the modern era is the development of the scientific theory of quantum mechanics. And that's because we have these teachings on quantum uncertainty. And what we've discovered is that this is actually measurable. This is what the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught 2,600 years ago that when you see a table or an object, it looks solid, but actually it's empty. It's not solid at all. And so, 100 years ago, if we started looking at atoms and we discovered that actually it's mostly empty space with energy. So what the Buddha taught was actually true. But not only that, then the Buddha taught that things don't exist. They don't exist and they do not exist. There's this middle way between them. And what we've discovered with quantum uncertainty is that when we look at the microscopic level, is that particles don't exist in a fixed state. Right? So an electron can exist simultaneously in multiple states. It has no fixed existence. And this is the most compatible theory with what we call the middle way, as it's taught in the higher levels of Buddha Dharma. And that makes me kind of very excited, really, because we actually have a mechanism by which we can see that this is the truth. Now, the problem is we need to realize this in our own mind. And so how are you going to do that? Well, what is taught in the teachings on the highest Yoga Tantra, so these teachings on the Buddha, Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbha, this essence of the Tathagata, is that is the natural state of mind. That is the natural way things exist. And this is a clue to what you need to do. It's not something that needs to be developed. It pervades all phenomena. It is the natural state of existence. The problem is we don't recognize it. And so why don't we recognize that? And the answer is because we are kind of deluded by our conceptual fallacies, our conceptual imputations. What we can say these conceptual imputations or fallacies are, there are negative emotions, our kleshas, right? We have basically fundamental ignorance. Fundamental ignorance is this identification with me and mine. It's the belief in a self as a fixed entity. And if you take it in the higher levels of Dharma, then it's the belief in these external objects as being real as well. And so then you get teachings from many people, you're already Buddha, there's nothing you need to do, just rest in the present moment. We've all heard this before, right? It's very common. So we do that, but it doesn't change our reality. And that's, well, we have to be honest, right? We can sit in the present moment, then we walk outside, and if there's a car coming in the street, we jump out of the way, right? We don't have any belief that we don't exist. It doesn't change our natural way of thinking. And not only that, if we get hit by the bus, we're going to hospital. So we're not going to be transparent. And so the question is, well, why is that the case? And that's because we have this intense programming through countless lifetimes that has caused us to be reactive in a particular way, in a mistaken way, to misidentify our experience. So yes, it is the case that your raw, naked experience that you have 24/7 in all cases, in all circumstances, is this Buddha nature. But we don't recognize it because we've got all this mental garbage. We've got all this kind of conceptual fallacy. We've got this lexicon, this database of all these mistaken ideas that we use to navigate the mundane world. And so there is work to do. Mm-hmm. Yes, you just need to rest in the present moment, but at the same time, you've got to do something with your bad habits. And so the Buddha Dharma is very much about the methods that help you to get rid of these bad habits. Even smoking is difficult to quit, right? If you smoke, then it's going to kill you, it's going to give you cancer, it's bad for you. You get a cough, but we still do it because we have this strong habituation. It's addictive. And essentially what it is we're addicted to samsara. So when we sit down and meditate, we're not able to rest in equanimity because our mind is always being drawn away by thoughts and ideas and desires and dislikes and all this sort of thing. So the ultimate is nothing other than, yes, the present moment of awareness, the way things are naturally. Problem is we don't see the things for the way they are. What we do is we perceive things as being real.
Lama Choga, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. I love your insights and your wisdom. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Boo Boo. I was very pleased to meet you.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, nice meeting you. And I'll end it with I brought up Thich Nhat Hanh a lot today, and he's just one of my heroes, and so are you. Now.
Yeah, wonderful teacher.
Yeah. And he said to be a monk is to have time to practice your own transformation and healing. And then after that, help with the transformation and healing of other people. And I see that in you, and that's what I get a lot out of your channel, so I appreciate it.
Okay, Booba, you're too kind.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Well, take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, you too. See you again. Bye.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a play. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on a day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.